Good evening, Monadnock region, and welcome to another special bonus guest episode of GoMo tonight. I am here in the Space Lounge this evening with, I'm Christy Loretto, the host, and I am here with my fabulous co-host,
Zoe Roten-Heinzman.
And here today we have with us Matt McLaughlin, Democratic candidate for Senate District 9 in the state of New Hampshire, which, for those of you listening out there, this is, I'm proud to say, our first foray outside of Peterborough politics because District 9 no longer includes Peterborough. And so Matt is based in Bedford, and we actually met him at the Temple Harvest Festival, which I think Temple might be the western edge of the district.
No.
No.
Oh, no. Temple's the western edge of Hillsborough County in the district, but then there are 6 towns out in Cheshire County.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So they really kind of split Cheshire County between the two
Yes.
districts then.
Yeah. Yep.
So interesting, yeah.
I make it all the way to the Vermont border with Hinsdale.
Wow.
Oh,
So
wow.
you go all the way to Hinsdale now.
Yeah. Yep.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. That is quite a range.
Yeah. There is.
So Matt, let's start things off. Why don't you tell us about yourself and about your campaign?
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. A little about myself. I am the youngest of 10 children, and I was born in Bedford, New Hampshire. I'm one of the few that called myself a native. My family moved up from Boston. The other 9 kids were born in Boston, and they moved up in the late 50s, and then I came along as number 10. I went to the Bedford Public Schools. I went to high school in Manchester, a year of prep school up in Maine, and after that, I was off to the U.S. Naval Academy. Well, while I was there, I did play on the varsity football team, and one of the good things I had was the 3 years that I made the varsity team, we beat Army all 3 times. So I have that as a little plus. After graduating from the academy, I went down to Pensacola, Florida, and I went to flight school. I was fortunate enough to get qualified to fly tactical jets, and I ended up flying the A-7 Corsair, and I was in Attack Squadron 86 and did 3 deployments on the USS Nimitz. I went as far north of the Arctic Circle, as far east as the eastern end of the Mediterranean off the coast of Lebanon. And on one of those cruises, we came home and went around Cape Horn, around the southern tip of South America. And that was pretty wild. I don't know how they ever did that in wooden ships, but that was very unique.
That is interesting. When I was in first grade, we did this project where we tracked this clipper ship race. And so it was people in these like old school boats that were, rounding the Cape down there. And half of them like wouldn't make it and stuff, you know?
Yeah. And for us, it was the month of May, which is like their December. So it was pretty violent, probably the most violent seas I ever saw. So, yeah. And then, so after I got out of the Navy, my wife was from Manchester. We both knew that we wanted to raise our children in New Hampshire. So we came home. I was an airline pilot for 33 years and retired at the start of the pandemic. And my wife was a school teacher for 27 years. And then after that, she got out and started her own business. So, so that's a little bit about me, just my personal background. And add to it a little bit, I have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. So one of my oldest child lives in New Jersey, and the other 2 live here in Bedford.
Fair. Yes. New Jersey is a favorite place of this program, actually. So, good for your son. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your campaign. What spurred you on to run, and what's kind of your mission? What are you hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what spurred me to run is in the month of June, I got a couple of phone calls recruiting me to run for the seat because at the time the Democrats were not going to field a candidate. So I said, give me a week to think about it. And as I was contemplating it, I was thinking back to my days both in the Navy and at the Naval Academy. And at the Naval Academy, there was a motivational saying written on the wall of one of the athletic buildings that said, if not you, who? And if not now, when? So I was kind of remembering back to my service in the Navy and how rewarding it was. I remember saying to my wife when I got out of the Navy, I will never have another job that has a greater sense of purpose and brings as much satisfaction as my service in the Navy. So I said, well, I'm retired now and I can hopefully get back into public service and see if I can rekindle some of that spirit.
Oh, that's
some other things that have caused me to that I've come across as I've been campaigning. I was struck recently by some articles in the New York Times and some podcasts I listened to with the saying, "How democracies die."
Mm.
And I was thinking to myself, as a Naval Academy graduate and former naval officer, I would have thought, referring to the United States of America, that those words would never even cross my lips. And I started to think about it. Everybody knows the obvious answer of democracies can die if you have an election and the team that gets the least amount of votes thinks that they won. And yes, I'm referring to Donald Trump in 2020. But I started to look back at it even further. I said, there have been seeds planted all along the past 20 to 25 years that have started to make changes in this country. And we all see it in the polarization of the politics, but it's been ongoing for a long time. And I've been referring now to the Supreme Court as the judicial wing of the Republican Party. And I'll give you some examples of what I mean. In the year 2000, they decided Bush v. Gore to put George W. Bush in office. In 2010, they passed Citizens United to put unlimited dark money into politics. Then they gutted the first half of the Voting Rights Act. I think it was in 2013. And just the other day, they had hearings when they're going to gut the second half of the Voting Rights Act. They gutted unions' ability in 2017 to participate in politics. In 2022, they gutted half of the Clean Water Act. And of course, the coup de grace was in 2022, the overturning of Roe versus Wade. So it's come to my attention that, especially with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court said they're going to send that back to all 50 state houses. And the state houses, there's going to be a lot of action in, not just in Concord, but in the state houses all across the country. So I consider this election to be very, very important for preserving some of the rights and normal laws in life that we've had in America for the past 50 years at least.
Yeah. And so, with all of that, especially you kind of alluded to it a minute ago, but like all of that going on at the national level, and of course these battles play out on the micro scale as well. So what does this look like in District 9 in New Hampshire in the next couple of years? And what does that mean for like a legislative agenda in the Senate?
The number one thing it means is, in the last session, the Republicans passed the first ever abortion ban in New Hampshire, and Governor Sununu signed it. It is my prediction that in the next session, if the Republicans are in charge, the restrictions on abortion will get more severe. And if the Democrats are in charge, abortion in New Hampshire will be legal and it will be safe. So that's the biggest issue.
Yeah.
Then there are other issues that come down from the federal level. But the second biggest issue that I see is education. But let me back up for just a second. If the Supreme Court does kind of what they have alluded to, where they may go after other rights that have been granted by previous Supreme Court decisions, things like contraception and same-sex marriage. So once again, control of state houses is going to be very, very important if this court continues on the path that it has been on.
Yeah, and can you elaborate just a little bit more on the education piece, because we hear about education concerns like all the time.
Yes, and
in our travels. Yeah,
same thing. When I go around and knock on doors, if you see toys in the front yard, you know that you're going to get people are going to say education is either their number one or two issue. Everybody is going to always probably say education is important. Nobody would deny that. But the big focus on having a good, solid public education curriculum and well-funded schools is necessary in New Hampshire. It's necessary to get an educated workforce for the 21st century. And I'll give you an example. I was at an event recently where Dean Kamen, the famous inventor in Manchester, was one of the speakers. Dean is creating an entire industry based in Manchester, New Hampshire, that's going to make replacement human body parts. Now, that's just incomprehensible that in our lifetime, hopefully in our lifetime, they'll have these things finished and they'll be making them. New Hampshire needs to, both high school and college, they need to produce a workforce that can provide him with the labor and the people that he's going to need to run those, to do those jobs. And not just, I'm not talking the full PhD level jobs at the top, but the lab technicians and computer technicians and other people who make the machinery work. So that's number one. The other perspective I have on the main reason, or a big reason, why public education is so important is, as a former officer in the Navy, I know that if we don't have recruits who can show up on day one and learn how to operate and maintain the most sophisticated military equipment in the world, then that will harm our national defense. So the reasons why education is important are fairly obvious. There's a couple of things. We all know the saying that actions speak louder than words. I've noticed, as I've done some research of how the Republicans' actions are compared to their words. In 2012, they passed the Business Tax Scholarship Credit Program, which allowed a business to take a portion of their business tax revenue and put it directly into a scholarship fund. So this lowers the revenue going into the state treasury, and it allows state tax money, to go directly to private schools. In
Mm-hmm.
the last session, they passed the voucher program, the education freedom accounts, I think they call it. And that allows the state portion of public education money that's supposed to go to each and every town to go to religious schools, private schools, and home schools. So those are two financial things they've done. Then in the last session, they also passed the divisive concept law. And that basically says if a teacher is teaching a divisive concept and gets convicted of it, they can lose their teaching certificate. And then, of course, basically that means they lose their job. So the old actions speak louder than words say their support for public education, I don't think is all that deep.
Yeah, and I think that's true, and I very much appreciate your articulation though of the reasons, why you feel that the public education is necessary, because even though that is considered obvious, right? I
Mm-hmm.
don't I think that some people don't see it that way, and I think it's hard to get that kind of answer from people as well, because
Yeah,
we have tried, and I think it's important to be able to say that
right.
we need the education for this. Another thing that we've kind of encountered in our travels, both as parents and through this work, is, you know and this is, we're not talking about ideological right wingers here, right? But there is sometimes in perhaps an increasing skepticism in traditional schooling, that we kind of encounter, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about where that comes from, and like how that can be addressed, because I think in some ways the Republicans benefit from that sentiment, even from people who are not necessarily ideologically aligned with them on the overall issue.
So you'd have to educate me again on your question. You're asking if yeah, rephrase it a little bit if you would, please.
Yeah, so I mean, it's that it we don't have any studies, unfortunately, but anecdotally, among people that we encounter in the Monadnock region and around the state, really, um, there's just sort of an increased interest in alternatives.
Okay.
And again, like I said, not just among like right wing people, but people who, whether they want homeschooling or Waldorf education, or
I'm wondering
any
if
of those
I'm
things.
wondering if it's a little bit because there's so much has been placed on the public school plate that they have to teach sex education. Um, Sometimes my wife used to teach in Manchester, and there was children who needed, needed social workers to help them brush their teeth and bathe and things like that. So much gets placed on the public school plate that I wonder if people just feel like they don't want their child to be inundated with other things other than reading, writing, and arithmetic. So some of that might be maybe they're upset that the schools are diverting time and attention to children that they, you know, it's hard for me to say it without without being accusatory to people, because I just
Sure.
don't know what their motivations might be.
I know what
But
you
the
mean.
public
Yeah.
schools have had a whole lot put on them that can distract from or detract from teaching just the reading, writing, and arithmetic thing. So that could
Yeah, and
be
I think that in itself can be kind of an important point, right? Because the public school system does serve other purposes in
yeah.
society beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic that are
And
important.
with all the requirements of teaching learning disabled children and physically disabled children, I think there are some people who want to get their children out of that environment, and
Mhm.
they feel the funds and attention are diverted too much to the other children. So that's a possibility.
I think that's a reasonable answer. Nice.
So you mention in your bio that you have met John McCain,
Hmm.
and I wonder if you see yourself as kind of a maverick or an independent in some
I do
way.
see myself as an independent thinker, and it was a real privilege both in 2000 when he ran and 2008. Um, I met him when he spoke at Daniel Webster College in Nashua, and we had such a similar background where we both went to the Naval Academy. We both were what's called light attack pilots, which is the same mission in the Navy. And of course, his service was much more valiant than mine from what he went through. But it was just a very interesting, and it was a proud moment to meet him and be with him and talk with him. And yes, I do admire his nonpartisanship. He was just it's funny in the military, things tend to be very mission orientated. You've defined the mission, define the metric to accomplish the mission, and set the goals and go out and do it. And he was kind of like that, and I see a lot of that in myself too. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. And so since I misspoke at the beginning when talking about the district, I looked up the towns, and yeah, the I had to laugh a little bit because District 9 before the redistricting was a very strange shaped district and included a strange group of towns, and it didn't get any less strange. Actually, I think I was assuming that the redistricting would have
Yeah.
made it more compact or something. But I think it's funny that both yourself and your opponent, Denise Ricciardi, are based in Bedford,
Correct.
which is that the easternmost? It
That
looks
is
like it is
that is
from
the easternmost
yeah
town in the district. Yes.
yeah.
And it's also population wise, it's about 45% of the district, I believe.
No
So
kidding, Bedford by itself. Okay,
yeah.
I didn't realize that. I worked in Bedford for almost a decade, actually. So very familiar with the drive and
Yeah.
with the kind of technology community in the area.
Hmm.
And but so how do you like view your district? Because obviously your district is very different.
Oh yeah.
Hinsdale and Bedford are
Yeah.
um,
Some of my
very
drive,
different towns.
I've driven all the way to the western edge. Yes, I've driven. Obviously, I've been to Keene many times. Some of the Hinsdale and Winchester. First time I've been to some of those towns. Yeah, it's a very diverse district, both education wise and financially, and with industry and tax base. So yeah, there's a lot of diversity in this district that has to be accounted for whoever represents it in Concord.
Yeah, for sure. And do you feel like there is a good mechanism for you to kind of stay in touch with like the those different industries in the different towns, and the varying concerns of the folks in Temple, say,
Yeah, well, I think podcasts and a YouTube channel would be some of the things that I would try to create for myself, as to put my word out to people, and then making trying to make town meetings and other face to face events is definitely something that has to happen.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a hustle, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. I'll put a lot of miles on my car. So
Yeah, I bet.
yeah.
Well, and just throwing this out there, I don't know if you write it all, but we do often publish columns from
Oh, okay.
folks with various viewpoints, and you know um,
Is that in the local Peterborough paper?
yeah, it's
You
all
guys have your
online. It's actually on
Okay.
gomonadnock.com. Yeah. So
Okay.
we've had a number of candidates write in and stuff, but our goal kind of post election is to definitely have some folks in office who want to use it to kind of regularly reach constituents and like
Okay.
continue that conversation. So just something to keep in mind down the line.
That
We'd love
sounds
to
great. I hope to be one of
get
your more proficient authors.
yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So another thing that we talk about often on this program is this concept of the greater Peterborough and Peterborough expansionism. And so we were just wondering how, like, would you mind should you win if Peterborough takes Temple off your plate for you? Can we just like absorb Temple? How would you feel about that?
At this point, I would be neutral about it. I would have to learn what are the pros and cons. What do the people of Temple think? Is Peterborough
This is a
trying to grow?
largely unknown issue,
Yeah,
so I
I've heard of it. So well, at least you're not trying to secede from New Hampshire. Okay, so
that's right. No, we're just trying to be a bigger piece of New Hampshire. That's
yeah,
all.
no, I mean that to me would be a decision that would, if the citizens of both towns wanted it, I would certainly not try and stand in the way. So,
Excellent.
mhm,
Excellent.
yeah.
Well, we are just about at time, Matt. Is there anything else that you would want the audience to know about yourself, or any closing remarks you'd like to make?
Just how important this election is. I think people say every year that this is the most important election ever. I think in my lifetime, this one is the most important with the changes that the Supreme Court has made, with issues up and down the ballot. Um, from the U.S. Senate race all the way down to the state house races. So this is really get out and vote. I would ask people to vote for me. I would ask them to be what the military would call the force multiplier and grab two or three other people, make sure any nieces and nephews or children away at college get their absentee ballots, and elderly parents drive them to the polls, do whatever you can. So that would be my big request. Absolutely. I really enjoyed this. Thank you guys for inviting me.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay. Thank you.